All right. Welcome, everyone, to our Friday Facebook Live segment, Caring Conversations, where we look forward to bringing topics that we know are relevant to our clients, their families, our caregiving teams, and our healthcare partners. And my name is Julie Collada, and I'm the founder and president of Open Arms Solutions. And Open Arms is a home care company, and we provide a professional care team of caregivers and care coordinators to help seniors and their families navigate the challenges of aging and illness, and we proudly support their dignity and independence in their own homes. And with me today is Eric Klein, who is the owner of Care Patrol, which helps families and discharge planners navigate the senior living process. And really, Eric, you and your team are transitional care managers. Really, that's really what Eric does, which is such an important topic or role in senior living. Our topic today is very important, timely topic that we're all thinking about, which is dealing with the emotional challenges of seeing your loved one in a senior living community during COVID. So for those that are joining us this morning, if you have a question, as always, there's a chat, and please submit your question. We'll be checking it during our Facebook Live segment, and we'll, Eric and I will do the best we can to answer those questions. So to start off our segment, Eric, how did you end up here? How did you end up? Tell us your story, please. How did you end up? Where did you start in your career? How did you end up where you are today at Care Patrol?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Julie. I spent 30 years in the senior living industry. I owned a production company that specialized in healthcare, pharma, and senior living. So I was the guy that traveled the country, branded properties, and sometimes helped to put lipstick on a pig, because I knew a great deal about how to make senior living look great, but I knew very little about the care component of it. And when my parents got sick, I realized that that care component was so important and started to educate myself on what was involved for both assisted living, in-home care, and memory care options. And as I educated myself, I found Care Patrol. And Care Patrol focuses on helping families navigate that entire process. We're not a list service, so we do a very thorough care discovery. And we come alongside families and we help them navigate both the care or clinical and the financial realities of finding that long-term care.
That's great. And, I think you've heard my story before. I got into this, and many of us do, after a personal experience that we've had with our loved one. I realized that, when I was trying to navigate what was best for my mom with no experience and no idea about options in senior living, at that time, I was really relying on the hospital, the discharge planners at the hospital, which did a really nice job, but I really absolutely understand the value of organizations like yours, because you really do your research. You really, and please, let's just talk about this. How do you get to know what the options are, and how do you really help determine what the best options to present to people are? Because there's so many options.
Right. So we become experts in our local territory. So I tend to focus on the city proper, all the way north and west. I have a partner that focuses on south and west. And we have 150 offices throughout the country so that we can all become an expert in our area. And we are in and out of the communities all the time. We get to know the front end management. We get to know the back end care teams. And it allows us to position families for success, because we match those care capabilities up, the care capabilities of the communities up with the care needs of those potential residents.
That's great. So your area is from downtown Chicago to how far north do you go?
I go up to the border.
Up to the border of Wisconsin.
Correct.
That's a big patch.
very large territory.
Yeah,
We tend to focus on the city and the North Shore because that's the most densely populated. It's where we
right.
have most communities and the most needs. But we are seeing a lot of activity in the collar counties now too. And we have a outstanding office in Milwaukee, a group of people there that service that area very well.
Okay, terrific.
Mhm.
So, this is such an emotional time for all of us. If we would have done a flashback a year ago or more,
Mhm.
no one could have ever predicted that we would be where we are now with COVID. Hopefully, this has helped us, learn lessons learned about potentially what could be, we could be faced with in the future. But I think this really kind of blindsided many people. At least I know it did me. So when you're talking to family members right now about moving potentially into a senior living community during COVID, what are some of the emotions that are involved in A, just moving a family, and then B, moving a family now during COVID?
Right. Pre-COVID, we had challenges. There were tremendous emotional challenges moving somebody to an assisted living. And COVID has exasperated some of those emotional challenges. We tend to see patterns in families, and families are telling us that they feel both relieved and guilty at the same time when they consider putting a loved one in assisted living. And those feelings are very normal. Guilt, resentment, confusion, relief, and many more. These are all common and they're very understandable reactions to a family member moving into an AL from their home. And it doesn't matter if the move was long overdue, if it was the result of a sudden illness and now the family is acting in crisis. It's a major change in the life of a loved one, and it resonates really throughout the entire family. And it creates concern not just about care that the loved one is going to receive, but also about the emotionally charged issues that the families might have had before they decided to move, and they're just not resolved.
Yeah, that makes sense. So when you're getting involved in these what has layer COVID on here now?
Yeah, well,
What are those kinds of emotions that are coming up that are adding to the complexity of the decision?
yeah, well, there's two. One is that there are limitations to touring communities right now, and not doing a virtual tour. Trying to do these Zoom tours where somebody's walking through the community, sometimes put a little bit of stress on the family because they can't physically be there.
Right.
Visitation is also another emotionally charged issue. Communities have a responsibility to keep their residents safe, and at the same time, families want to see their loved ones. Both things are true at the same time. And the challenge is, how do we accommodate the safety and the visitation issues at the same time?
Yeah. And that's on, we work closely with senior living communities, and that's on everybody's mind. The senior living partners that we have are so concerned about, giving their residents everything that they need to be comfortable anytime. But during COVID now, isolation is even a bigger issue and a bigger concern for people and families. And so, you're right. I mean, what's on everybody's mind is how do we make the decision to safely bring families into the community to visit with their loved ones? But, safety's got to be the primary concern for everyone. So, I know more and more families, and I know we're working with families for the communities where we're on site and helping families. We help families with seniors with technology.
Mm-hmm.
And helping them connect with their families using Facebook Live or whatever, or Zoom or whatever. But that's just a huge step in connection for people right now. Like we're connecting right now over video Zoom. The same thing is true for people in these senior living communities and their families. So when who are the people that you work with most, Eric? What I mean by that, members of the family. How often does a senior contact you? How often is it the adult children that contact you? Is it, aunts, uncles? Who are the people you primarily work with?
Sure. We really find it's all the above. Very often it is a spouse contacting us that is suffering from caregiver burnout. They've made a commitment and they've been dedicated to that spouse for most of their life. Yeah. And now there's simply come a time where they can no longer handle that care at home. And caregiver burnout is real. So we get spouses that are reacting in crisis. They may need memory care. They may need an in-home care team. They may simply need an assisted living so that they can kind of return back to their role of being a spouse and not a caregiver. We also get calls from extended family. Very often it's a niece or a nephew that has some concerns about a loved one and nobody else in the family has stepped up. And they're looking to help gather information and put together a long-term care plan. The most common call is usually from an adult son or daughter, though. And they have taken over some of that caregiving responsibility. They may have been helping out with the finances, the shopping, the home maintenance, and they are realizing that it's beyond their care. And they are looking for either help in the home, sometimes on a short-term, couple hours a day basis, sometimes 24 hours a day to make sure their loved one is taken care of. Or sometimes the level of care simply gets too high, to be taken care of in the home, and they need another solution.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talk with family members too. I have friends that call me and family that we have these discussions where, Julie, can you recommend when's the right time for me to be having these conversations? When do I do it? When do I start having these conversations with my loved one? What's your advice there?
We always say as early as possible. It's always better to educate yourself and to try to make some decisions while you still have options rather than reacting in crisis. We have assisted living regulations. We have limitations on home care. If somebody's a two-person assist, if they have open wounds, if they need a needle or a bag, those put limitations on the care they can get. And if we can help guide somebody to make those decisions before they get to that point, then they have many, many options. Very often we get the call when, mom slips and cracks their head on the bathroom floor and ends up in the ER. And that's a very different kind of care routine or placement.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've done lots of, over the years that I've had the company, done lots of speaking, community education, and we have something that's, one of the talks we do is called Having the Talk. Right. We all remember when, or maybe we remember, I remember. Well, I remember more about when I had the talk with my children. I don't remember as well. It was a few years ago when my parents had the talk with me. But, the talk traditionally is an awkward, uncomfortable conversation we have to have about, in the case of our children, it's that, how can you be safe when you're have a serious relationship, and how do you be safe there? How do you make good decisions there? And how do you be safe? And really, those can be very awkward conversations. And I can recall my husband and I put it off as long as possible. I eventually stepped in and had those conversations, but very difficult and awkward. But thank goodness, right? Once you do it, you're incredibly grateful that you do. Well, it's the same kind, in my opinion. Now, life is full circle. Mm-hmm. And now we're having these, or should be, because I completely agree with you. It's so important to have these conversations as early as possible. And there's, we could do a whole topic and segment on how to introduce those topics and questions to our loved ones, because it's awkward for people. It's hard, right? Mom and dad, it's role reversal often. Mm-hmm. But it's incredibly important to, as soon as you can, as you said, to say, hey, Mom, Dad, listen, I want you to control your life, and you have all the options in your control. because as I'm sure you know, as a senior advisor, control is so important for all of us, right? And for seniors who are going through stages of grief and letting go and kind of perceiving that they're losing control, when you have that conversation, it's really important to have that respect and try to give your parent as much as you can control over their decisions. So really important. So a couple other questions here. How can I help a loved one settle into a new community? So it's like any transition. You send your kid off to college, there's a transition. How do you help your loved one, best adjust to their new world?
Right. Well, that transition is difficult for everybody. Most people don't want to leave their homes. And I think it's important to remember that when somebody moves into a community, it's not just a home, but it's a new home. And your father or your mother should be able to make it feel like their home. They should decorate it. They should arrange it in a way that makes them feel comfortable and personable. It's important that decoration not impede function, as far as mobility and care issues, but thoughtful decorating can really meet a goal, not just caring, for the physical body, but also for the mind and the spirit of a resident. And sometimes those things are just simple. It's bringing things brought from home. It's borrowing those favorite objects, trying to create the same mood and texture and tone that they're used to. It's personalizing a space. In COVID times, people are getting very caught up on isolation and quarantine and spending more time in their room. And these things become even more important because it helps to have comforting items, collections, chairs, coffee tables, a favorite blanket, photos of the family. And all those things go a very long way to making a new community somebody's home.
Yeah. Yes. Those are all very, very important things. There's a question that we have here. The question is, how do I support my mom through visits alone? I'm not sure I understand the question. So, Sarah, if you could help us maybe understand that question a little bit better, clarify it, then we'll do our best to answer it. So is there any guides that you have on that same question, Eric, in terms of how often to communicate with that loved one, especially now during COVID?
We always say that the first 30 days of a transition are difficult for everybody involved, the
Right.
resident, the family, and the staff. There's a getting to know you period, and there's an adjustment. And we want the resident to know that family is present. We want the family to give staff time to do their job to help with that adjustment. And we want staff to realize the stress this is putting on everybody. So it really is a team effort. With the visitations on limiting, the technology, the FaceTime and the Zoom calls has become critical. And as long as the calls are productive, a once an evening call, I think, is very healthy. A 10 times a day call is not healthy. And there's balance in there somewhere.
Yeah. Yep. That makes perfect sense to me. How do you deal with, because it does happen sometimes, I'm imagining you've seen scenarios, and I'm sure it's hard to see for everyone, but mom's angry, dad's angry. They really are not happy that this is happening. This was really, for whatever the dynamics are in the family, for whatever reasons, it was the perception is that the move to a senior living facility was kind of thrust on mom or dad. That decision just had to be made, and they're angry. So how do you deal with it, and how do you help? Have you seen that before?
We see it regularly. We've all experienced moves, and we know how a normal move to a different part of town or out of state for a new job can be stressful. And if we can kind of think about those experiences, we can relate to what mom is going through. And then you add on top of that, losing your independence, leaving a familiar surroundings to something that's very unfamiliar with a bunch of strangers. And trying to understand how just a major change like this can affect somebody. And if we have expectations that it's going to be a rough road for 30 days, I actually think it helps to manage those expectations. And if we're not surprised that during the early days of that move, the whole experience for the family might bring up guilt, tension, resentment, fear, sometimes fatigue. Sometimes, mom or dad is likely to do or say things that will upset us or make us feel guilty. And they may express those things verbally, sometimes non-verbally, and they let you know when they're not happy with those new arrangements, and they often want to go home. Sometimes they might act mad, they might berate you, they might ignore you, but these behaviors and the reactions that we have to them are very normal under the circumstances. And after they adjust to their new arrangements and go through the process that almost every resident goes through, it's at their own speed, at their own time. The adjustment won't be accomplished overnight, but after a few weeks, the staff starts to become family. You start to see more peaks than valleys. And it's important not just for the staff to reach out to the resident, but for the family to reach out to staff or anyone else to get moral support, because it's very tough on both the family and the resident.
Yeah, I think that's important. So another question from a viewer: how can I work through the guilt of having to place my loved one in an assisted living, even though I know it's best? How do I work through that guilt?
Right. One of the most difficult things to do is when you have promised a loved one to keep them at home, and now you know that it's time to put them into an assisted living. Or if you feel that it's your responsibility to provide that care, which is a very noble calling, but most of us are not wired to be 24-hour caregivers. So one of the ways to walk through that guilt is to simply realize that there are positive benefits to, number one, putting a care team around somebody at home, or number two, putting them in an assisted living where they have 24-hour care, where you can now become the spouse, the child, or take on your designed family role and not be a caregiver.
Right.
That assisted living is going to offer 3 nutritious meals, snacks, around-the-clock help, medical needs, if they so arise. There's going to be socialization and entertainment and things that you simply can't provide at home alone.
Absolutely. When you're having conversations with families, because I know in what you do as a transitional care manager, people part of post senior living. What kinds of questions do you ask people because if people can provide care for their loved one at home, right, that's sometimes something that you can help people with too. Is that right? Is that correct?
Correct. So if somebody chooses to stay in their home and it's appropriate for them to do that, and we're seeing more of that in virus times right now, hospitals are discharging directly home instead of a skilled nursing facility. There's definitely a need for that, and we walk families through that process.
So so I wanted to make sure that the viewers understand, with a transitional care manager like yourselves, it's not you don't assume anything. I'm imagining you question the family together to really determine what they think is the right thing and the best thing, and then based on that, you make your recommendations. So it might be it's right, as you said several times, to move to an assisted living community, or you might determine that you can provide the appropriate care, safe care at home. You make the best decisions with the family. The family makes the decisions. You just help guide them.
Right. We'll educate the family, and it's always up to the family to make that decision. We start by doing a very thorough care discovery. And as we review those care needs and clinical components, we will help give the family options that will best allow them to either take care of the family in home with help, or decide it's time that they do need to get additional care outside of the home.
Great. So some other questions related to um, COVID, how do we visit in the time of COVID? What's the reality right now that's going on in terms of how do I do that? How do we do that? It's important for me to see my loved one. How do we do that?
Right. So a lot of it depends on what week you ask, right? Because the rules and regulations are changing weekly. Both the federal and state government have input on that. And then each community has individual leeway to decide above and beyond how they want to restrict access to communities. So we see a lot of porch visits, a lot of Zoom calls, a lot of window visits. We were just starting to see communities open up to very limited in-person visits, but they have since started to close because as the virus infections go up, those protocols get a little bit stricter. So there's been a little bit of a seesaw pattern, and that's been the challenge for families, is trying to determine how to be consistent in visitation and really how to be creative in visitation. Because simply because they can't physically visit doesn't mean they should stop making contact with their loved one. The technology is important, and communities help with that. Caregivers help with that. And we need to find ways to write letters again, to engage with technology, to send gifts, to have the kids go outside the window and sing to grandma. You know, those kind of things are really important.
Yeah, absolutely are. You know, one of the things that's kind of a bonus in this environment is because we heavily have to lean on technology sometimes, like Zoom. I know some of our families the seniors are getting visits from their loved ones in New York, in California. It's just, in some respects, for family members that are far away, now using technology, they can have more interaction with their loved one in a senior living community or at home, which is a positive.
Yeah, absolutely. There's an entertainment component to that because it breaks up the monotony for a senior, but it's also important to listen, to really try to understand what the senior is going through. Let them express some of their frustration, and try to speak back to them in a very positive light. Use your conversation to lovingly motivate them. If they're frustrated because they can't transfer themselves into their wheelchair now, you turn that into a positive and you say, well, after you can transfer from your wheelchair now, we'll start working on ways of, doing an outing or having a visit or those kind of things. And don't give up simply because you can't visit the community these days.
Yeah, good advice. Should I bring my kids to visit?
We always say, absolutely, definitely bring them. Within the COVID, world, within guidelines, it's important to not spread disease, obviously, but you can never underestimate the importance of a connection between kids and the elder family members. And studies show that relationship between the grandparent and the grandkids is really second only to the parent and the kid, and the adult. And the elder grandparent has an opportunity to kind of continue their family role when they're seeing their grandkids. They can pass on feelings and attitudes and emotions to another generation. And it's just so critical. And because the kids adapt to FaceTime and Zooming so easily, they love it. It's second nature to them. It's not stressful. And if the family member can communicate, you let them play games with the child. You get a checker game going, tic-tac-toe, hangman, and schedule it weekly. Give them something to look forward to. Allow them to stay engaged. And commotion is good. When kids go to assisted living communities, sometimes the parents are all worried about how they're going to act. Seniors love that. Craziness and confusion is good, and it breaks up monotony for them. And it's the same thing online. When kids are screaming in the background and going crazy, it's great. It's really important.
I agree with you, and it's great for the kid. You already said this, but great for everybody. The kids in COVID, we all in COVID need ways to break up our day, to engage in life in different ways. So it's really great for everybody. We only have about a minute left. Mm-hmm. just, I guess maybe the last question that we're going to have time for right now is, what kind of support is there for the caregiver? We're talking about the family member caregiver right now, right? What kind of support's available for that person? Because that is that support, whether that move has happened wherever, whether there's the choices to keep the loved one at home or move to a community, that caregiver, that loved one is needing some support. So what kinds of things can you share?
Right. So often we focus on the senior and their needs, but we neglect the needs of the caregiver. And sometimes there seems to be a lack of support for that caregiver, and the emotions, the burnout that they feel are very real. We're fortunate that there's many resources. Care Patrol helps families navigate some of that process. Facebook groups have become extremely important. There's many local area resources like the Area Agency on Aging, the local library. And some assisted living communities actually have groups or family support councils that allow them to have input. They can share their emotions on what they're experiencing, and they can have input on the care of their loved one at that community. And those groups take on a real important role during COVID.
Oh, absolutely. Eric, we're out of time.
It was fun. Thank you.
This was a great conversation. I really, appreciate it. I appreciate the role you play, the company plays to help people navigate these challenging times. So, and everyone, please take a note. You can contact Eric in the information that's in the chat box. And thank you, Eric.
It was a pleasure. Good to talk to you.
Good to talk to you too. Bye-bye now.